Tansei, good afternoon. I'm Chris Sanashkate. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. Just in time for July 4th, the Trump administration celebrated Independence Day by signing a highly controversial tax cut bill into law. That bill gives the legal green light to open a highly sensitive area of Alaska's Arctic to oil and gas drilling. As APTN's Sarah Connors tells us, Indigenous groups and conservationists are weighing in on the so-called Big Beautiful Bill.
It's what U.S. President Donald Trump proudly calls his Big Beautiful Bill. But for those fighting to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Northeast Alaska, there's nothing beautiful about it.
We don't take this lightly at all. This is our way of life.
Along with cuts to Medicaid and food assistance, the federal budget bill requires 4 oil and gas lease sales within the refuge's coastal plain over the next 10 years. The 1.5 million acre plain serves as nursery grounds for the porcupine caribou herd, an important food source for the Gwich'in in Alaska and northern Canada.
That's a sacred place where life begins. No amount of money can justify what is taking place.
But just because lease sales within the refuge can legally go ahead, that doesn't mean anyone's buying. 2 prior lease sales mandated under the Trump administration received virtually no interest from oil and gas companies. The only company currently holding leases is an Alaskan state corporation, which owns 7 tracts of land covering more than 300,000 acres. This conservation group says development of those leases, or any others, will be an uphill battle.
That company does not have the ability to develop those leases on its own. Any lease sales that happen outside of that are going to be leases that are outside of the zone of interest for any oil companies.
But for the Inupiat living in the North Slope borough, oil and gas development on their homelands comes with economic benefits. Tax revenue from infrastructure on the North Slope is reimbursed back into the borough's 8 communities, helping pay for things like roads, schools, and hospitals. This organization advocating for the Inupiats' interests believes responsible oil and gas development is possible.
The last few years, it seems like we're finally making progress with respect to this bill being signed.
As for the Gwich'in, the fight to protect the sacred place where life begins is far from over.
This is our way of life, our traditional way of life, and we will do whatever we can to protect our land.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
To Montreal now, where the city's public transit system has reintroduced a measure that prevents loitering in the metro system. This policy specifically impacts homeless people who are sheltering in the metro. Our APTN reporter Savannah Craig visited a homeless shelter to learn how this ban impacts the shelter's services.
Let's try it. You know, I'm not sure that I'd want to lay here too long. Oh God. Yeah, no, not for sleeping.
This bench is just one example of efforts made by the City of Montreal to discourage the unhoused from sleeping in public. One example of many in the city.
What we have here is a large, tall new ventilation system that was just installed this year. And this used to be a vent that blew heat right down onto the ground, and a person could, even in the winter, just by sitting under the vent, stay warm.
David Chapman is the executive director of Resilience Montreal, a homeless shelter with a large number of clientele who are Indigenous, some even second-generation residential school survivors.
This is an example of some of the measures that are put in place to just sort of steer the unhoused away.
This is not only seen in redesigning public spaces, but policies too. Montreal's transit system, known as the SDM, reintroduced a move-along order on June 18th. This order gives special SDM constables additional power to respond and remove those who are occupying the metro and not using it to commute. The order was first introduced in March of this year, lasting 7 weeks. Chapman had this to say to APTN News about it back then.
So what's going to happen? We push people out of the metros. Well, that solves the problem for the STM officials. But where do the people then go?
Chapman said the move-along order was bringing out larger crowds of clientele to resilience, forcing some to sleep in hallways. Now he's seeing these effects again. APTN News reached out to the STM, but it did not grant us an interview. The STM says the justification for bringing back the move-along order is that safety improved during the first implementation of this order, for both riders and workers. In a press release announcing the reintroduction of these measures, STM Board of Directors Chair Eric Allen Caldwell stated, "The real solution to the issue of homeless people sheltering in metros is a tangible and sustainable response to help the vulnerable, including more funding for resources all year long." More funding for resources is a sentiment Chapman agrees with. But he says much of the focus from governments has been on housing initiatives, instead of balancing this with support for emergency services.
Organizations that try to operate and offer a safe place to people while they're working it out can't find funding, because the message that governments are getting is stick the money directly into housing first programs.
He says homeless support centers should be available in every neighborhood in Montreal.
If we keep this up, we won't be ending homelessness, but we might be ending homeless people.
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Montreal.
Thousands are once again fleeing their homes in Manitoba, and on Thursday, the Manitoba government declared another province-wide state of emergency due to the wildfires. This is the second state of emergency in less than 2 months, and officials say this is the worst wildfire season Manitoba has experienced on record. The Canadian Armed Forces are also once again flying people out of some communities. At a press conference on Thursday, Premier Wab Kinew said the declaration was called due to intensifying wildfires and the mandatory evacuation of 9 communities. 105 wildfires are currently active. There have been 261 wildfires in Manitoba to date, more than the on-year average of 197. Around 6,000 people were alerted to evacuate in the past 24 hours from the town of Snow Lake and Garden Hill First Nation. Estimated total evacuees is now at 12,600 people. There are currently 1,000 hotel rooms booked for elders and people with high medical needs, but the vast majority of evacuees are expected to be put into congregate shelters. Officials say this is the worst year for wildfires in the province's 30-year electronic record.
The area burned as of July 8th was just over 1 million hectares. The 20-year average to that date would only be 94,000 hectares. So what we're looking at is somewhere in the neighborhood of nearly 11 times the 20-year average for hectares burned. This is the worst year in our 30-year electronic record. So we have records going back to 1995, and the area burned is the worst that we've seen in all of those 30 years. The second worst was in 2013 when we burned just over 720,000 hectares.
First Nations leaders have recently gathered in Kamsack, Saskatchewan, after a recent in-custody death of an Indigenous man. Last month, 61-year-old Gerald Straightnose died while in the RCMP cells in Kamsack. CTV's Sierra D'Souza Butts reports.
Serving his community for 6 years, Gerald Straightnose left a mark on people in Kisakus.
He was a band counselor. He was a hunter. He always hunted and gave food to the community members, his family members.
In an effort to continue serving the people in his neighborhood, Gerald decided to deal with matters from the past.
He had charges that led back from years ago, and he wanted to deal with them in order for him to get his license back. So he gave himself up willingly to the police, and unfortunately it led to his death.
Less than 48 hours after being taken into custody to Kamsack RCMP detachment, Gerald was unresponsive in his cell. After being checked by RCMP members and EMS arriving on site, he was pronounced deceased.
Nobody deserves to die that way.
Now, his family and neighboring First Nation communities are calling for answers.
We're hoping to start a movement here today to ensure that, something like this does not happen, not only in Kamsack but across Canada, to our First Nations people.
Any family, no matter who you are, when something like this happens, you expect answers. You expect closure. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt, rightfully so. Families are hurting, families are sad. This is what we deal with every day.
The Saskatchewan RCMP says it's aware of the event, expressing its sincere condolences to the deceased family and loved ones, adding, because the Saskatchewan Serious Incident Response Team investigation is ongoing, they are unable to provide comment at this time. In a statement, the province says it can't provide additional information about the ongoing CERT investigation, but the province has been in contact with the family and will appoint a community liaison to assist in the investigation, adding the man's cause of death remains under investigation by the Saskatchewan Coroner Service. Family members say they will not stop speaking out until they receive answers and justice. Sierra D'Souza Butts, CTV News, Kamsack.
We have to take a short break, but before we go, here's a look at our story from APTN's Rachel May, who is working on with families from across Saskatchewan who joined the Morin family in North Battleford to remind the public they aren't giving up hope on missing loved ones. Welcome back. In recent weeks, APTN News and other news organizations have been reporting on comments made by Manitoba's Minister of Accessibility and an American Sign Language interpreter. Last week, it came to light that Nahani Fontaine, the minister in question, had blocked every member of the APTN News team on social media. In a statement from the minister on Wednesday, Nahanni Fontaine said, quote, "Immediately upon learning that journalists were blocked on my social media account, I directed staff to reverse this decision. I value the role of the media in our democracy and remain fully open to interviews, questions, and respectful engagement." This week on the Truth in Politics panel, we're asking if it's appropriate for an elected official to block an entire media outlet. Dennis Ward speaks with Jennifer Leywitz, the CEO of Pasquale Strategies, and Nigon Sinclair, a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press.
Jennifer, Nigon, great to have you with us. Jennifer, as mentioned, Manitoba's Minister of Families, Accessibility and Gender Equality, Nahanni Fontaine, blocked APTN reporters, some as far away as Halifax, digital media editors, even our lineup producer on social media. That move has now been reversed, though, with the minister saying she, quote, "Immediately upon learning that journalists were blocked on my social media account, I directed staff to reverse this decision." What do you make of all of this?
Oh, there's a lot of pieces that I can take away from that. The first is that it's always interesting when politicians say out loud that they don't actually manage their own social media. There's nothing that breaks the public's trust like hearing you don't run your own social media, which is very, very common in the political world. It's just one of those things that like nobody really wants to talk about. But I think it also is showing a real culture of what we're seeing with that minister behind the scenes. Like, what do you mean you blocked almost an entire network? It's one thing to block one person if they're going a little hard at you, especially because some journalists have been in instances where they've put politicians in the hot seat and those politicians don't like it. But this was very much like a coordinated effort, and it would have taken a long time. I assume they would have had to look for a list of some sort and then go one by one down the line. And I feel like any staffer that is working within communications of an elected minister should have a pretty general understanding of what to do and what not to do. And I'm having a hard time understanding or even believing that she didn't know about this, because any staffer that has ever worked in communications knows that your job could be on the line if you make a massive mistake like that. So I would be interested to hear what she's actually planning to do with those staffers that allegedly did this, and also to make sure it never happens again, because you're essentially trying to avoid accountability when you are blocking an entire news network from seeing your social media.
Nigon, your take on whether politicians should be allowed to block members of the media from their social media?
It's amateurish, it's petty, and then on top of that, it's also irresponsible. The fact is that as media, our job is to talk about, reflect upon, and then also show the public what politicians are up to, and anything less than that is leading to corruption, to leading to a kind of politics that we may be seeing in areas like the United States, in the White House. And I've gotten quite a lot of criticism this week comparing situations in Manitoba to situations in the United States, but I feel completely confident in explaining this, saying what happens in the United States, what happens in Canadian media in Ottawa, it also happens in Winnipeg. When politicians decide to ban media from talking about what is happening in politics, whether that be in formal government like Canadian institutions, or whether that be in First Nations organizations which claim to act like governments, or are governments in some cases, like First Nations bands and councils, for example. The reality is that you have a responsibility to the public to talk about what you are doing and take responsibility for what you're doing. If you're an elected official who purports to represent people, citizens, then you have to report to those people. You have to be accountable to those people, and the venue for that is through media. It's not through social media, which is oftentimes unvetted. It's oftentimes through people who have very deep opinions, who aren't thinking or don't have any way in which they're being held accountable to an objective position. Most media outlets, even those who sometimes have overt political opinions, at least have some kind of ethics and boards in which they are adhered to. And so that's why, in many cases, banning reporters from talking about what politicians do and say in public settings has to be present, has to be something in which you make those reporters available to you.
A group of youth recently got the chance to perform in front of 50,000 fans for a Coldplay concert. That story when we come back. Stay with us. Hi for staying with us. St. John's 23, Charlottetown 20, and partly cloudy. Sunny in Cartwright at 29, Happy Valley Goose Bay 29. 22 in Saguenay, St. Jovite 26. 28 in London and sunny there, Ottawa sunny and 28 there. Sudbury 23, Thunder Bay 21. Smoky in Puckatawagan and Thompson at 18 and 16. 21 in Gimli, sunny there, and Barons River, Smoky and 18. Rain in Regina at 13, Saskatoon 15. 18 in Meadow Lake and sunny there, LaRange 19 and sun. Grand Prairie 25, Fort McMurray 24. 31 in Medicine Hat, Edmonton 26. 25 in Vancouver and sunny there, Bella Coola 22. Sandspit 16, Prince Rupert rain in 15. 21 in Watson Lake, rain in Beaver Creek at 18. 22 in Yellowknife, partly cloudy there, Fort Simpson 24. Sax Harbor 9, Polituck 14. Baker Lake 18, Chesterfield 16. And Arctic Bay 6, rain in Agrulik at 7. A new episode of our APTN News in Focus podcast is now available on all major podcast platforms. This week, our APTN web reporter Leanne Sanders joins host Sierra Bettens to dig into why provinces are pushing the feds to fast-track major infrastructure projects, even if it means sidelining environmental protections and Indigenous rights. Here's a clip.
They asked for specific timelines and some next steps for repealing the Impact Assessment Act, the Physical Activities Regulations, clean electricity regulations, and greenhouse gas pollution pricing and things like that. They also wanted to discuss amending the Species at Risk Act, and they said to quote, respect Canada's constitutional jurisdictions and suspend the proposed oil and gas emissions cap. And of course, that's something Alberta's Premier has long been calling for.
It's back to regular programming for our French viewers with APTN's Nouvelle Nationale back this week. Our host, Kim Sullivan, joins us now. Hey, Kim.
Hey, Grayson.
Hey, Kim. July 11th marks an important anniversary in your neck of the woods.
Absolutely right, Creason. Any Quebecer old enough to remember 1990 will remember the siege of Kanesatake, or like some people like to call it, the Oka Crisis. Today marks the 35th anniversary. We have Savannah Gregg that will be at a peaceful protest tonight downtown, but we're also welcoming on the show anthropologist Pierre Trudel, who was actually on site that day 35 years ago.
That sounds really interesting. There was also a partnership agreement signed yesterday that means big things for two Indigenous communities there.
A lot of big things happening in Quebec. Lac-Simon and Kitsisakik, two nations here signing a partnership with Agnito Eagle for a gold and copper mine near their communities. This is not only going to change their economic landscape, but also help preserve the land in their area for years to come. So it's definitely good news.
Great to hear. And the chief from one of those communities is stepping down, no?
Yes, you're right, Greason. A lot of controversy has been happening in Kitsisakik politics over the years, and Regis Penisway will actually not seek re-election next month. He's going to try out for vice chief, but he's been chief on and off since 2017, so it is going to be quite a bit of change for that community.
And there's also a bit of controversy in local Montreal politics there, hey?
Yep, an elected official commented something not too nice towards the Indigenous population on TikTok, and he's kind of out. You're going to want to hear that story.
Well, that's tonight at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yes, it is. See you there.
The international band Coldplay recently performed in Toronto this week for their Music of the Spheres World Tour. And on Tuesday night, the concert included a number of First Nation youth from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Have a listen. The 7 youth sang a traditional welcome and grand entry song after they said a prayer in their Ojibwe language to 50,000 fans in Toronto's Rogers Stadium. Chief Claire Salt also gave her greetings on behalf of the people of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and as the original peoples of the territory in where the concert was held. Chief Salt says a council member from the Squamish Nation who did a similar ceremony with Coldplay previously reached out to her on behalf of Coldplay's Chris Martin. The chief admits the youth only had a few days to prepare, but they ended up nailing their performance after many practices.
I got the text if I wanted to do it, and we started practicing, and it wasn't only until like the day before I realized like I'm actually going to a Coldplay concert and doing this, and then like the nerves started to kick in. The thing mostly I hoped was my voice didn't crack, because I would have started laughing and not held it together.
Coldplay, I am so honored and so grateful that they recognize, and it really comes from that human side of things, that they recognize, First Nations. They recognize that, the First Nations treaty lands, and they recognize, our foundation here. And so, my message to them is, to express my gratitude that they had that insight.
A big congrats to the youth for doing such a great job. You make us all very proud. And that's your noon show for this Friday, July 11th. Dennis Ward is back for your evening newscast. Please join us then. From all of us at APTN National News, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Have a safe weekend with family. Excellent.